The transport ship Viridian Hope drifted through the asteroid field like a ghost, her hull scarred by decades of battle. Inside her command deck, Kale Voss stared at the tactical display showing the Netherian fleet's position. 17 dreadnoughts, orbiting the mining colony of Zirion Prime. His cybernetic eye whirred as it calculated firing solutions, while his remaining human eye burned with the cold fury that had sustained him for 37 years. The Netherians had come to Earth when Kale was 12, their crystalline ships descending from the void like malevolent stars. They didn't want the planet. They wanted its children. Earth's youth possessed something the dying Netherian race coveted, the unique neural plasticity that allowed rapid adaptation to their biomechanical augmentation technology. In 3 days, they had harvested over 2 billion children, leaving behind only the adults who watched helplessly as their progeny were dragged screaming into the darkness between stars. Kale's parents had hidden him in the ruins of New Geneva, but the Netherian scavenger drones found him eventually. He spent the next 15 years as a test subject in their augmentation laboratories, watching as thousands of human children were twisted into living weapons, their minds shattered and rebuilt to serve their captors. The Netherians called them gifted ones, beings who could interface with any technology, survive in any environment, and feel no pain. But they made one crucial mistake with Kale. During the neural conditioning process, a power surge caused a feedback loop that burned out the compliance circuits in his brain. He learned to hide his retained free will, to mimic the blank obedience of his fellow prisoners while secretly planning his escape. When the opportunity came during a transport, malfunction, he seized it, stealing a Netherian scout ship and fleeing into the void. That was 22 years ago. Since then, Kyle had become something the Netherians never anticipated, a ghost in their machine, a virus in their perfect system. He had learned their technology, mastered their weapons, and turned their own augmentations against them. His body was more machine than man now, a patchwork of stolen Netherian biotechnology and human ingenuity. His heart was a quantum power core. His bones were reinforced with their living metal, and his mind was protected by firewalls that could crash their most sophisticated AI systems. The Netherians called him the Broken One, the failed experiment, that had somehow learned to bite back. But to the scattered human resistance cells hidden throughout the galaxy, he was simply known as the Reaper. Kale's ship shuddered as her cloaking field activated, bending light around her hull until she became invisible to even the most advanced sensors. He had spent 3 months preparing for this moment, studying the Netherian patrol patterns, identifying their weaknesses, and crafting the perfect trap. Zirion Prime wasn't just a mining colony, it was a processing center where newly captured human children were prepared for augmentation. Destroying it would deal a crippling blow to their operations. His fingers danced across the control matrix, a fusion of Netherian biotechnology and human determination. The ship's weapon systems came online, their alien power cores humming with barely contained energy. In the cargo bay, 40 fusion charges waited to be deployed, each one capable of cracking a moon. Through the view screen, Kyle watched the Netherian fleet continue their patrol, unaware that death was drifting through the asteroid field toward them. He thought of the faces of the children he couldn't save, the friends who had died in the laboratories, the parents who had lost everything. Today, the Netherians would learn what it meant to face a human with nothing left to lose. "For Earth's children," he whispered, and pressed the attack command. The first explosion lit up the void like a newborn star. Kyle's charges, hidden among the asteroids for weeks, detonated in perfect sequence, sending tungsten fragments racing toward the Netherian fleet at relativistic speeds. 3 dreadnoughts simply vanished, their crystalline hulls shattered by the kinetic bombardment. The remaining ships scattered like startled insects, their perfect formations dissolving into chaos. But Kale wasn't finished. The Viridian Hope dropped her cloak and dove toward Xerion Prime's surface, her engines screaming as she accelerated beyond safe parameters. The facility's defensive grid came online, their biomechanical turrets tracking his approach, but he was already inside their decision loop. His ship's computer core, a hybrid of human coding and Netherian neural networks, flooded their systems with cascading logic bombs. The planet's surface was a nightmare of organic architecture and industrial sprawl. Netherian cities grew like tumors across the landscape, their buildings pulsing with bioluminescent veins. But Kale's target was the central spire, a twisted tower of living metal that housed the augmentation laboratories. As his ship screamed through the atmosphere, he could see the facility's evacuation pods launching, carrying precious Netherian scientists to safety. He wouldn't let them escape. Not this time. Kale's fingers found the manual override, pushing his ship's reactor beyond its design limits. The quantum core began to destabilize, its containment field fluctuating wildly. He had 60 seconds before the chain reaction would tear his ship apart, but that was more than enough time. The Viridian Hope impacted the spire at Mach 12, her reinforced hull carving through the biomechanical structure like a spear through flesh. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut, but Kale's ship carried more than just kinetic energy. As her hull breached, she released a cloud of nanophages, microscopic machines designed to devour Netherian biotechnology from within. The spire began to collapse, its living metal liquefying as the nanophages consumed its molecular structure. Kale activated his emergency beacon as he ejected from the dying ship, his armored suit carrying him clear of the expanding destruction. Below him, the augmentation laboratories exploded in sequence, their quantum reactors adding their energy to the growing conflagration. But the greatest destruction came from within. Kale had spent months infiltrating the facility's computer network, implanting a virus that would spread through the Netherian communication grid. As the spire fell, the virus activated, carrying with it a message that would be broadcast across every Netherian world. The screams of the human children they had taken, recorded during the augmentation process and amplified 1,000-fold. The psychological warfare was devastating. The Netherians, despite their technological superiority, were still biological creatures with emotions and fears. The sound of dying children they had tortured, drove many of them into catatonic shock. Their perfect unity began to fracture as guilt and horror spread through their collective consciousness. As Kale's suit descended through the burning atmosphere, he watched the Netherian fleet above struggle to maintain coherence. Their ships were colliding with each other, their crews paralyzed by the psychic feedback from the broadcast. 2 more dreadnoughts plummeted toward the planet's surface, their pilots unable to maintain control. The evacuation pods were falling, like rain, their occupants screaming as they burned up in the atmosphere. Kyle felt no satisfaction in their deaths, only the cold determination to see his mission through. Each Netherian that died was one less captor for humanity's children, one less torturer in the endless laboratories of pain. His suit's thrusters fired, guiding him toward the secondary facility on the continent's far side. Intelligence suggested they were holding nearly 1,000 human children there, preparing them for the next phase of augmentation. Kyle checked. His weapon systems, plasma rifles, nanoblade gauntlets, and a small fusion charge that would serve as his final ace. The ground rushed up to meet him, and Kale rolled as he landed, his augmented body absorbing the impact. Around him, the remains of Xerion Prime burned, the Netherian city dying as his nanophages consumed everything they touched. In the distance, he could see the secondary facility's defensive turrets swiveling toward him, their biomechanical minds, calculating firing solutions. Let them come. He had been preparing for this moment for over 2 decades, and nothing would stop him from reaching those children. The secondary facility stretched across the barren landscape like a metallic cancer, its biomechanical spires reaching toward the burning sky. Kyle approached through the smoke and ash, his suit's sensors picking up the thermal signatures of Netherian defenders positioning themselves along the perimeter. They had learned from Xerion Prime's fall, this time they would be ready. But so was he. Kale's first strike came from beneath. The nanophages he had released weren't just consuming the primary facility. They were spreading through the planet's underground network, following the biomechanical conduits that connected all Netherian installations. As he reached the facility's outer wall, the ground erupted in a series of controlled explosions, collapsing the defensive bunkers and creating a breach in their perimeter. The Netherians poured through the gap, their crystalline exoskeletons gleaming in the firelight. These weren't the scientists and technicians from the laboratories. These were harvesters, the warrior caste responsible for capturing and processing human children. Each one stood 8 feet tall, their limbs ending in surgical implements that could cut through steel or delicately extract a brainstem. Kyle met them head-on, his plasma rifle spitting coherent energy that turned their crystalline armor to vapor. His augmented reflexes, stolen from their own technology and enhanced with human desperation, made him faster than their targeting systems could track. He moved like liquid death through their ranks, his nano-blade gauntlets carving through their formations. But for every harvester he killed, 2 more emerged from the facility's depths. They were trying to delay him, to give their compatriots time to evacuate the most valuable specimens. Kale's cybernetic eye tracked their movements, calculating probabilities and tactical options. He had perhaps 20 minutes before their reinforcements arrived from the orbital fleet. The facility's main entrance was a massive biomechanical sphincter that dilated as he approached, revealing a corridor lined with pulsing organs. The Netherians had grown their buildings rather than constructing them, and walking through their facilities was like moving through the digestive system of some vast creature. The walls secreted a luminescent slime that tracked his movements, reporting his position to the facility's central mind. Kale's suit released a cloud of counter-nanites, microscopic machines that began attacking the facility's nervous system. The walls convulsed as their biological components died, and the tracking slime became inert. Emergency lighting flickered on, casting grotesque shadows as the building's immune system tried to purge the invading technology. He reached the first, holding area, and felt his heart break anew. Behind walls of crystalline force fields, human children floated in suspension tanks, their small bodies already showing the early signs of augmentation. Neural interface ports had been drilled into their skulls, and biomechanical implants were growing beneath their skin like tumors. Some were no more than 5 years old. Kyle's hands shook as he accessed the facility's control systems, his stolen Netherian biotechnology interfacing with their security protocols. The force fields flickered and died, and the suspension tanks began to drain. But as the children began to wake, he saw the truth that had haunted him for decades. Many of them no longer remembered being human. "Please," one young girl whispered, her eyes already showing the telltale shimmer of neural conditioning. "We don't want to leave. This is our home now." The Netherians were more than just captors. They were corruptors, turning humanity's children into willing servants. Kale's rage burned hotter than the plasma cores in his weapons. He gathered the children who were still salvageable, those whose conditioning hadn't progressed too far, and led them toward the facility's exit. But the harvesters were waiting. They had sealed the corridor behind him, trapping him and the children in the facility's depths. Their leader, a creature that had once been human but was now more machine than flesh, stepped forward. Its voice was a harmonious blend of organic and synthetic tones. "You cannot save them all, Broken One," it said. "These children are ours now. They have been remade in our image, perfected beyond their original limitations. Why do you fight to return them to the weakness of pure humanity?" Kale's response was to activate his final charge, a fusion device that would collapse this entire section of the facility. The countdown began, and the harvesters realized too late what he intended. As the explosion tore through the biomechanical structure, Kyle wrapped his arms around the children he could save and triggered his emergency teleporter, a device cobbled together from stolen Netherian technology and human ingenuity. They materialized. On the surface, as the facility collapsed beneath them, its death throes shaking the entire continent. But Kyle's victory was bittersweet. He had saved 37 children, but hundreds more remained trapped in the facility's depths, their minds too far gone to be rescued. Above them, the surviving Netherian ships were retreating, their formations broken and their crews demoralized. Xerion Prime was lost, its processing facilities destroyed, but the war was far from over. The abandoned mining complex on Kepler 442b had been humanity's last major colony before the Netherian invasion. Now its tunnels served as a refuge for the Resistance, a hidden network of survivors who had spent decades planning their revenge. Kale descended through the main shaft, his salvaged children clinging to him as they entered the underground city. The caverns had been carved from living rock, their walls lined with salvaged technology from a dozen different species. Human engineering, mixed with Netherian biotechnology, creating a hybrid aesthetic that spoke to the desperate ingenuity of the survivors. Bioluminescent panels provided light, while quantum processors managed the facility's life support systems. Commander Vex Halloran was waiting in the central hub, her scarred face reflecting the harsh reality of their existence. She had been a fleet admiral before the invasion, but now she commanded a ragtag collection of survivors, pirates, and resistance fighters. Her right arm was a Netherian biomechanical prosthetic taken from a harvester she had killed with her bare hands. 37, she said, studying the children Kyle had rescued. That's more than we've saved in the last 5 years combined. It's not enough, Kale replied, his voice carrying the weight of decades. There are millions more in facilities across the galaxy. Every day we delay, more children are lost to their conditioning. Vex led him deeper into the complex, past workshops, where human engineers reverse-engineered Netherian technology, and meditation chambers where psychics tried to contact the enslaved children across the stars. The Resistance had grown beyond simple revenge. They had become a counter-evolution, adapting enemy technology to serve human purposes. In the tactical center, holographic displays showed the current state of the galaxy. Red markers indicated known Netherian facilities, while blue dots represented resistance cells. The enemy controlled nearly 60% of known space, their biomechanical ships patrolling trade routes and harvesting populations from newly discovered worlds. The Conclave has been monitoring your activities, Vex said, gesturing to a massive holographic display. Your attack on Xerion Prime has had consequences beyond what we anticipated. The display showed the Netherian response to the facility's destruction. 3 entire fleets had been diverted from their expansion efforts to hunt for the Resistance. But more importantly, the psychological warfare had begun to fracture their unity. Reports from deep-cover agents suggested that some Netherian factions were questioning the morality of their actions while others were doubling down on their aggressive expansion. There's something else, Vex continued, leading him to a secured chamber. We've been analyzing the data you transmitted from Xerion Prime. The Netherians aren't just harvesting children randomly, they're following a specific genetic pattern. The chamber contained a single stasis pod, its occupant a young human girl no more than 10 years old. But as Kyle looked closer, he could see the subtle differences in her bone structure, the slight elongation of her limbs, the enlarged cranial capacity. She was a hybrid, born from Netherian genetic manipulation. Her name is Zara Wick, Vex explained. She was rescued from a transport 3 months ago. Her parents were part of the original harvest, but they were kept alive for breeding purposes. The Netherians have been creating human Netherian hybrids, beings that can interface with both biological systems naturally. Kale's cybernetic eye focused on the child's neural patterns, detecting the unique brainwave signatures that made her so valuable to their enemies. She was a bridge between species, a living key that could unlock technologies neither human nor Netherian could access alone. "How many?" he asked. "Intelligence suggests at least 10,000, possibly more. They're being held in a facility called the Genesis Ark, a mobile laboratory that moves between systems. Our sources indicate it's currently in the Proxima Centauri system, but it won't stay there long." Kale studied the tactical displays, his enhanced mind calculating the probabilities. The Genesis Ark was the key to the Netherian breeding program, but it was also the most heavily defended facility in their empire. Attacking it would require resources the Resistance didn't possess, allies they didn't have, and a level of coordination that had never been achieved. "What are you thinking?" Vex asked, recognizing the look in his eyes. "I'm thinking it's time to change the rules of engagement," Kale replied. "The Netherians have been treating this as a harvesting operation, a simple resource extraction. But what if we forced them to acknowledge it as a war?" He turned to face the tactical display, his reflection merging with the holographic representation of the galaxy. "The Genesis Ark isn't just a laboratory. It's a symbol of their power, their ability to reshape species according to their desires. If we can destroy it, broadcast the destruction across every Netherian world, we can shatter their sense of invincibility." "And the hybrids aboard?" Kyle's expression hardened. "We save who we can, but we can't let concern for the few prevent us from striking a blow that could free the many. The Netherians have forced us to make impossible choices. Now we force them to make the same calculations." As he spoke, alarms began to sound throughout the facility. The Netherian hunter-killer fleets had found their location. The hunter-killer fleet descended on Kepler 442b like a swarm of mechanical locusts, their biocrystalline hulls gleaming in the system's pale light. Kyle watched from the mining complex's observation deck as 37 Netherian vessels took positions around the planet, their scanning arrays probing the surface for signs of the Resistance base. "They followed your quantum signature," Vex said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "The teleporter you used on Zerion Prime, it left a trail they could track." Kale nodded grimly. He had suspected as much, but saving those children had been worth the risk. Now the entire Resistance network was compromised, and thousands of survivors were trapped in the underground facility. The Netherians would begin orbital bombardment within hours, sterilizing the planet's surface before sending down harvester teams to capture any survivors. "How long do we have?" he asked. 6 hours, maybe less. They're charging their planet crackers now. Kale's cybernetic eye interfaced with the facility's tactical network, analyzing the enemy formation. The Netherians were being cautious, maintaining high orbit, while their scan beams penetrated the planet's crust. They had learned from Zerion Prime that direct assault carried risks, better to destroy the Resistance from a safe distance. But their caution was also their weakness. "I need a ship," Kyle said. "Something fast, with a clean quantum signature. The Stellar Wraith is our fastest courier. She's got experimental phase shift engines and a cloaking field, but she's untested in combat." "Perfect. I'll also need a volunteer crew, people who understand this is a one-way mission." Vex studied his face, seeing the cold determination that had driven him for over 2 decades. "You're going after the Genesis Ark now, aren't you? While their attention is focused here. The Resistance gathered intelligence on the Ark's location, but they've never had the resources to attack it. Now, with their hunter-killer fleet committed to this system, it's defended by only a skeleton force. If I can reach Proxima Centauri before they realize what's happening, I might be able to disable it." "Might isn't good enough, Kyle. If you fail, those hybrids will be lost forever, and we'll have sacrificed everything for nothing." Kale's hand moved to the neural interface at the base of his skull, feeling the alien technology that had been forced into his brain decades ago. "I've been carrying a gift from the Netherians for 22 years, their own biotechnology integrated into my nervous system. I know their protocols, their weaknesses, their fears. The Genesis Ark isn't just a laboratory, it's a monument to their arrogance. Time to bring it down. The Stellar Wraith was a sleek vessel, her hull composed of adaptive metamaterials that could shift between different configurations. Her crew consisted of 12 volunteers, all of them survivors of the original Earth evacuation. They understood what was at stake and had accepted that they would likely not return from this mission. As the ship prepared for departure, Cale made one final preparation. He uploaded a virus into the facility's quantum network, not the destructive nanophages he had used on Xerion Prime, but something more insidious. It was a memory virus containing the recorded experiences of every human child who had been augmented, tortured, and transformed by the Netherians. When the hunter-killer fleet inevitably breached the facility's defenses, they would interface with the quantum network and be flooded with the accumulated trauma of their victims. The Stellar Wraith launched through a concealed exit, her phase shift, engines allowing her to slip between dimensions and avoid the Netherian sensor grid. As the ship accelerated toward the system's edge, Kyle watched Kepler 442b shrink in the view screen. The planet's surface was already beginning to glow as orbital bombardment commenced, but the underground facility would hold for several more hours. The journey to Proxima Centauri took 18 hours at maximum phase shift velocity. During the transit, Cale interfaced with the ship's computer systems, uploading tactical data about the Genesis Ark and briefing the crew on their mission parameters. The Ark was a massive vessel, over 20 kilometers in length, with a crew of 50,000 Netherians and storage for over 1 million human specimens. But it was also a research vessel, not a warship. Its defenses were minimal, relying on escort vessels and orbital platforms for protection. Intelligence suggested those escorts had been recalled to deal with resistance activities in other systems, leaving the Ark vulnerable. As they approached the Proxima system, the Stellar Wraith's sensors detected the massive biomechanical signature of the Genesis Ark. The vessel hung in space like a crystalline cathedral, its hull pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that indicated active research. Operations! Smaller vessels moved around it like antibodies, ferrying supplies and personnel between the Ark and the system's mining facilities. Target acquired, the ship's pilot reported, initiating final approach. Cale's hands found the weapon controls, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility. Somewhere aboard that vessel were 10,000 hybrid children, beings caught between two species and belonging to neither. His mission was to rescue them, but if that proved impossible, he would ensure they never became weapons in the Netherians' hands. The Stellar Wraith dropped her cloak and accelerated toward the Genesis Ark, her experimental weapon systems charging for the battle to come. The Genesis Ark's interior was a labyrinth of organic corridors and crystalline chambers, its architecture grown rather than built. Cale moved through the vessel's arterial passages like a virus through a bloodstream, his stolen Netherian biotechnology allowing him to interface with the ship's biological systems, while his human ingenuity found ways to subvert them. The boarding action had been swift and brutal. The Stellar Wraith had punched through the Ark's weak defenses, her crew sacrificing themselves to clear a path for Cale's infiltration. Now he moved alone through the ship's depths, following the quantum signatures of the hybrid children to their holding areas deep within the vessel's core. The first chamber he found contained over 1,000 stasis pods, each one housing a child, whose genetic structure had been altered beyond recognition. Their bodies showed the graceful elongation of Netherian physiology combined with human adaptability, creating beings that were beautiful and terrible in equal measure. Neural interface cables connected their developing brains to the ship's central consciousness, allowing them to share experiences and memories across the quantum field. But these children were not prisoners. They were willing participants in their own transformation. As Kyle accessed the ship's data networks, he discovered the horrifying truth. The hybrids were being raised to believe they were the next stage of evolution, superior to both humans and Netherians. They saw their parent species as primitive, unworthy of survival in the galaxy their hybrid race would inherit. "You should not have come here, Broken One." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, resonating through the ship's biomechanical nervous system. Kale turned to see a figure emerging from the chamber's walls. A hybrid child who appeared to be no more than 12 years old, but whose eyes held the wisdom and cruelty of centuries. "I am Nexus Prime," the child said, its voice carrying harmonics that human vocal cords could never produce. "I am the first of the new race, the bridge between what was and what will be. These are my siblings, and you will not harm them." Kale's cybernetic eye analyzed the child's biosignatures, detecting the massive neural enhancements that made it more computer than organic being. This wasn't just a hybrid, it was a living weapon, capable of interfacing with any technology in the galaxy. "Your parents were human," Kale said, his voice carrying the weight of accumulated grief. "They died screaming as the Netherians harvested their genetic material. You are not evolution. You are violation." Nexus Prime's expression remained serene, but the chamber's walls began to pulse with aggressive bioluminescence. "My parents were weak. They clung to their primitive biology, refusing to accept the improvements that would make them perfect. We are what they could have become, if they had possessed the vision to transcend their limitations." The child raised its hand, and Kale felt his stolen Netherian biotechnology begin to rebel against his control. The neural interfaces in his brain sparked with pain as Nexus Prime attempted to override his systems, to bring him under the collective consciousness that governed the hybrid children. But Kale's technology was not just Netherian, it was corrupted, infected with human creativity and desperation. He had spent decades modifying the alien systems, introducing chaos factors that made them impossible to predict or control. As Nexus Prime's attack reached its peak, Kale's defenses activated, sending a feedback pulse through the quantum field that connected all the hybrids. The chamber erupted in screams as the children experienced pure human emotion for the first time in their lives. Grief, rage, love, and desperate hope flooding through their modified consciousness. Some of them began to remember their original identities, their human names and faces appearing in their shared memory like ghosts from a forgotten past. "What have you done?" Nexus Prime gasped, its perfect composure cracking as it struggled to maintain control over the collective. "I've given them a choice," Kale replied, moving deeper into the chamber. "Something the Netherians never offered their parents. The ship's defenses activated, biomechanical constructs emerging from the walls to stop his advance. But Kyle was no longer fighting just for himself. He was fighting for every human child who had been taken, every parent who had lost everything, every survivor who had refused to give up hope. His weapons cut through the Netherian constructs. Like light through shadow, their stolen technology unable to match the fury of human determination. As he reached the chamber's central control matrix, Kale began uploading the virus he had prepared during the journey, not a destructive program, but something far more insidious. It was a compilation of human art, music, literature, and philosophy, everything that made his species unique and precious. As the data flooded through the quantum network, the hybrid children began to understand what they had lost when their humanity was stolen. Some of them chose to remain as they were, their modifications too extensive to reverse. But others, those whose transformations were still incomplete, began to reject the Netherian biotechnology, their immune systems attacking the alien implants as their human genetics reasserted themselves. Nexus Prime's scream echoed through the chamber as its control over the collective shattered. The child's perfect features began to distort as competing biological systems fought for dominance within its body. It was dying, caught between two incompatible forms of life. "I could save you," Kale said, kneeling beside the fallen hybrid. but you would have to choose to be human again. I cannot, Nexus Prime whispered, its voice breaking with the weight of impossible choices. I am the bridge between worlds. If I fall, they will have no one to guide them. Then guide them toward freedom, Kale replied. Show them that they can choose their own path. As the Genesis Ark's systems began to fail around them, Kale gathered the children who had chosen to reclaim their humanity and led them toward the escape pods. Behind them, the ship's biomechanical hull was already beginning to collapse as its hybrid technology turned against itself. The greatest battle of the war was about to begin. The Genesis Ark's death throes lit up the Proxima system like a second sun, its biomechanical hull collapsing into itself as the hybrid technology consumed the vessel from within. Kale's escape pod tumbled through the debris field, its hull scarred by the energy discharge from the Ark's quantum reactors. Around him, dozens of other pods carried the hybrid children who had chosen to reclaim their humanity, their young faces, pressed against the viewports as they watched their former home die. But the Ark's destruction was only the beginning. Across the galaxy, the quantum network that connected all Netherian facilities was carrying Kyle's virus, spreading human consciousness through their collective like wildfire. On 1,000 worlds, augmented children were beginning to remember their names, their faces, their dreams of home. The perfect unity of the Netherian Empire was fracturing as its victims reclaimed their stolen identities. Kale's cybernetic eye tracked the approaching Netherian rescue fleet, their crystalline hulls gleaming as they moved to investigate the Ark's destruction. But these ships were different. Their formation was ragged, their movements uncertain. The virus had reached their crews as well, forcing them to experience the accumulated trauma of their victims. Many of the ships were already turning away, their crews unable to face the horror of what they had done. The lead vessel, a massive dreadnought designated as the Eternal Harvest, moved to intercept the escape pods. But as it approached, Kyle detected something unexpected, a human quantum signature aboard the ship. One of the augmented children had somehow gained control of the vessel's systems, turning its weapons against its own crew. The Eternal Harvest's communication array crackled to life, and a familiar voice filled the pod's cabin. This is Captain Lyra Voss, formerly of the Earth Defense Force. All human survivors, please respond. Kyle's heart stopped. Lyra had been his sister, taken in the same raid that had claimed him 37 years ago. He had assumed she was dead, another victim of the Netherian augmentation process. But somehow, she had survived, retained her humanity, and seized control of one of their most powerful warships. Lyra, this is Kale. I'm in Pod 7. Coordinates. I know where you are. Little brother, I've been tracking your quantum signature since you escaped Kepler 442b. The resistance network is more extensive than you realized. We've been preparing for this moment for decades. As the Eternal Harvest moved to collect the escape pods, Kale could see the ship's biomechanical hull being reshaped by human will. The Netherian technology was responding to human creativity, transforming from an instrument of oppression into a tool of liberation. All across the galaxy, similar transformations were taking place as augmented humans seized control of their captors' vessels. The final battle for humanity's future was not fought with weapons or armies, but with the power of choice itself. The Netherian Empire had built its civilization on the enslavement of other species, but they had made one crucial error. They had given their victims the tools to fight back. Every augmented human was a potential saboteur, every hybrid child, a living weapon that could be turned against their creators. As the rescue operation continued, reports began flooding in from across the galaxy. Netherian facilities were surrendering without a fight as their own technology turned against them. The biomechanical ships that had once carried children to augmentation centers were now carrying them home. The crystalline cities that had housed the Netherian elite were being abandoned as their inhabitants fled in terror from the awakening consciousness of their victims. But not all of the Netherians were willing to accept defeat. A faction of hardliners, led by the Archon Nexus, had retreated to their home system, determined to make a final stand against the human uprising. They had gathered the remnants of their fleet and were preparing to sterilize every world that had fallen to the rebellion. "We have to stop them," Lyra said as the Eternal Harvest accelerated toward the edge of the system. "If they reach the core worlds, they'll trigger a cascade reaction that will destroy half the galaxy rather than let it fall into human hands." Kale nodded, his augmented senses already calculating the tactical situation. The Netherian home system was defended by quantum barriers that could destroy any approaching fleet, but those same barriers could be turned against their creators if someone could access the control systems from within. "I'll need to reach the planet's surface," he said. "The quantum barriers are controlled from the capital city's central spire. If I can corrupt their control systems—" "You won't be going alone," Lyra replied. "The hybrid children you rescued, they're still connected to the Netherian quantum network. They can guide us through the barriers, help us find the control systems." The journey to the Netherian home system took 3 days, during which the Eternal Harvest was joined by dozens of other captured vessels. The Liberation Fleet was a strange sight. Crystalline Netherian dreadnoughts flying alongside human freighters, biomechanical cruisers commanded by augmented children, and hybrid vessels that seemed to shift between organic and mechanical forms, as their crews willed them to change. As they approached the quantum barriers surrounding the Netherian home system, Kyle could feel the collective consciousness of the hybrid children reaching out through the network, their enhanced minds interfacing with the ancient defense systems. The barriers had been designed to keep invaders out, but they had never been tested against beings who carried both human ingenuity and Netherian biotechnology within their souls. "I'm detecting massive energy buildups throughout the system," Lyra reported from the bridge. "They're preparing to activate the cascade generators. If those go online, they'll turn every star in the local cluster into a supernova." Kale's cybernetic eye focused on the tactical display, watching as the Netherian fleet took defensive positions around their home world. But something was wrong with their formation. Ships were breaking away from the main fleet, their crews, apparently in revolt against their commander's suicidal plan. The virus is still spreading, he realized. Even here, in their most secure system, our message is reaching them. They're beginning to understand what they've done, and some of them can't live with that knowledge. The hybrid child beside him, a girl who had chosen the name Echo in memory of her lost humanity, placed her hand on the ship's neural interface. "I can feel them," she whispered, her voice carrying harmonics that made the ship's hull resonate. "The Netherians, they're afraid. They created us to be perfect, but they made us capable of feeling their guilt." The Eternal Harvest passed through the quantum barriers like a ghost, the hybrid children's connection to the network allowing them to navigate the deadly energy fields. Behind them, the Liberation Fleet followed, each ship guided by the consciousness of the children who had once been prisoners aboard Netherian vessels. The home world of the Netherians was a crystalline paradise, its surface covered with biomechanical cities that pulsed with bioluminescent beauty. But as the fleet approached, Kale could see the signs of panic. Evacuation ships fleeing the planet's surface, orbital platforms going dark as their crews abandoned their posts. "The central spire," Echo said, her enhanced vision piercing the planet's atmosphere. "I can see it. The cascade generators are there, in the heart of their most sacred city, but the Archon Nexus is waiting for us." Kale checked his weapons one final time, feeling the familiar weight of stolen Netherian technology turned against its creators. "Then let's not keep him waiting." The assault on the central spire was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. Human ships dove through the planet's atmosphere alongside Netherian vessels commanded by their former prisoners, while hybrid children used their biomechanical abilities to shut down the city's defenses. The sky above the crystal metropolis burned with the fury of a species that had been pushed beyond its breaking point. Kale's drop pod punched through the spire's outer hull, his armored form crashing into the heart of the Netherian command center. Around him, crystalline walls pulsed with the rhythm of a dying civilization, their bioluminescent patterns flickering as the cascade generators prepared to fire. The Archon Nexus was waiting in the central chamber, its form a perfect fusion of organic and mechanical elements. It had been beautiful once, but centuries of biotechnological enhancement had transformed it into something alien and terrible. Its voice, when it spoke, carried the weight of a species' desperation. "So the Broken One comes at last," it said, its words resonating through the quantum field. "You have destroyed everything we built, corrupted our perfect unity, turned our greatest achievements against us. Are you satisfied with your revenge?" Kale's response was to raise his plasma rifle, its barrel glowing with barely contained energy. "This was never about revenge," he said. "This was about justice. You took our children, violated their minds, turned them into weapons. Now you face the consequences." "We gave them perfection," the Archon screamed, its perfect composure finally cracking. "We freed them from the limitations of their primitive biology, made them capable of surviving in a hostile universe. And you would return them to weakness? To the suffering of pure humanity?" "I would return them their right to choose," Kale replied. "Something you never understood." The final battle was brief, but decisive. The Archon Nexus had the advantage of advanced biotechnology and centuries of experience. But Kyle had something more powerful. The accumulated rage of every parent who had lost a child, every survivor who had refused to give up hope, every victim who had chosen to fight back rather than submit. As the Archon fell, its death scream, echoing through the quantum network, the cascade generators began to shut down. Across the galaxy, the remaining Netherian forces laid down their weapons, their will to fight broken by the loss of their leader and the weight of their collective guilt. The war was over. Humanity's children were coming home.